19. Nakamoto, on horseback, had just returned to his headquarters, a large gated residence inside the walls of Nanking. Night was falling. It was a two-story building of Western architectural style with a steep, ductile roof, beige stucco walls, and a porch supported by imposing columns. The gate itself was wide enough for a car to drive through, and the road gently wound its way through a small front garden to the porch. A large bowled fountain stood in the middle of the garden, and poised on the rim of the bowl was a statue of a short, curly-haired boy. No water trickled from between his legs, however, and the water in the bowl was green with algae. The surrounding grass was brown and dry, with only the faintest hint of green still left in the pockets of lawn next to the house. Nakamoto's suite was on the second floor. It was a spacious bedroom with its own private bath and an adjacent study with a large mahogany desk and an antique reading lamp and a few tall bookshelves. Downstairs was a cozy sitting room with an elegant western sofa, cushioned, high-backed chairs, tables, and antique lamps and clocks. A marbled fireplace served as the focal point of the room, and several tastefully framed oil paintings, mostly western landscapes, covered the walls. An adjoining dining room held a large table which could seat 8 people comfortably. Zamba, together with several other staff members, took the other 3 rooms on the second floor, while the remaining rooms downstairs were occupied by some junior officers. "Get my bath ready now," Nakamoto barked as he dismounted. His feet had not even touched the ground. "Yes, sir," Zamba replied, jumping off his horse too. "It'll be ready in a minute." As he strode toward the front steps, Nakamoto caught sight of something crawling slowly near the foot of the wall next to the house. He stopped. It was a toad, a huge, ugly green toad. The very sight of its earthy, crinkled, leprous skin made him shiver with repulsion. The toad stopped. Its tiny, unblinking eyes were fixed straight ahead, unmoving. Nakamoto's hand moved to his sword. "Get rid of that ugly thing," he gestured to Zamba. Upstairs, Nakamoto stepped into the huge white porcelain bathtub filled with clean, steaming hot water. As he eased back in the tub lazily, he relished the feeling of being carried afloat in the water. As the heat of the water penetrated his skin, a delicious sensation permeated every fiber of his body. He was being transported far away to another world filled with tantalizing thoughts and a soft, tinkling sound arising from somewhere deep inside his memory. He closed his eyes, relishing the memory again. A moment later, he was brought back to reality by boisterous uproar. Voices could be heard down the hall, singing, "The one gotten last night, the bride the next day when possessing her, does the cunt stink?" Nakamoto reached for a bar of soap and began to wash and scrub himself. "If all of that is not enough, this time if it smells to the limit, if to that extent cunt stinks, if it stinks that much, the cunt, I'll tell you a way to avoid it. Cook some solid cod fish, leach it, and put it in a washing tub." Nakamoto stared at the water. On its surface floated a thick layer of tiny soapy bubbles that glittered faintly in the dim lamplight. The joyous singing went on. "Even if this is not enough, grind some spice and pepper into powder, and this is into the private part. Try pudding. Nearly all the odor will disappear." Nakamoto shook his head. "Spice and pepper powder? That must burn as painfully as—" Damn! Nakamoto fell back in the tub listlessly and buried his body deep in the hot water again. He shivered suddenly and could feel the water lapping against his chest and chin as a flood of hateful memories surged back to haunt him yet again. It is the hand of a giggling woman reaching out from the doorway of a shabby inn tucked away in a dark back alley. The soft hand leads a sheepish first-year cadet into a dimly lit room. Having been brutalized for months by sadistic officers and upperclassmen, the young cadet is seeking comfort and tenderness at last. But he awakes the following morning only to see, in the glaring light of the morning sun streaming in through the open soji screen, a hideous toad-like face with disheveled hair and a limp mouth filled with crooked yellow teeth. It's grinning, leering at him, and giggling. The cadet shuts himself in the bathroom, pouring salt into a bowl of water, dipping a small towel into the bowl, and with a salty wet towel feverishly wiping the stinky crust from his manhood. The cadet leaves the shabby inn in the dark back alley on a moonless night with a bloody sword in hand. Spice and pepper powder in the private part. The brigadier general grinned, shook his head. That must hurt even worse than salt. The bath was finally over. Nakamoto put on his kimono. He felt so clean, like he had been many years ago, before he had become a cadet at Ichigaya Military Academy. Now he was still like the cute little son of Okasan. The last time he saw Okasan was right before he left for China. That was 6 years ago. He had gone home to bid Okasan farewell. Her frail figure, pale and bedridden with illness, brought tears to his eyes. The first thing he ought to do once the mopping up campaigns in Nanking were over was to ask for leave to go back and see Okasan. Otherwise, he would regret it for the rest of his life. It had been a long day, but the bath took care of it. After the meal, Nakamoto slumped comfortably in the sofa in the sitting room and sipped from a cup of heated sake on the end table. Things had gone well since he entered the capital early Sunday morning, charging into the city hot on the heels of retreating Chinese troops. His frontline units had been overwhelmed by the sheer volume of prisoners they had taken. Thousands of them, who had not even time to abandon their weapons and change into civilian clothes. It was a little inconvenient for his troops, but they had handled it satisfactorily. Since then, his troops had been carrying out mopping up operations in the safety zone and other parts of the city with great effectiveness. At the mere thought of the safety zone, Nakamoto couldn't help but wonder who among his superiors had been thoughtless enough to grant legitimacy to this annoying idea. Nakamoto was certainly not willing to be bothered with having to process prisoners, feeding them, finding shelter for them, getting medical treatment for their wounded, releasing them just because they had surrendered. It was insanity. He was pleased that his subordinates, Tajima and others, had been able to act decisively when confronted by overwhelming numbers of prisoners. To hesitate or delay their march forward into Nanking would be to invite failure. It would be unacceptable. Nakamoto knew of the order. He was sure all battalion commanders and their subordinates had seen it by now. All prisoners of war are to be executed. Method of execution: divide into groups of a dozen, shoot to kill separately. This order had come from Lieutenant General Asaka Yasuhiko's office. Prince Asaka Yasuhiko, the uncle of the Showa Emperor, possessed the necessary decisiveness to be a conqueror, much more so than General Masui. Nakamoto was relieved now that Asaka was making the decisions about Nanking. Once Nanking was completely beaten, the whole of China would fall. Nakamoto sat before the fire. As he was bathed once again in warmth, his thought drifted away. The tinkling noise comes again, as crystal and as mysteriously titillating as he had always remembered it. The sound of undergarments rustling and dropping to the floor, followed by the sound of water splashing, lapping. Nakamoto stares at the ceiling and thinks. Suddenly, the shoji screen moves silently to the side and Ryoko walks into his room timidly in a brightly colored kimono. Her rich, lustrous dark hair is held in place high on her head to keep it out of the water. She advances toward him in small, quick steps. Already he can smell the intoxicating, sweet fragrance from her soft skin. With impatient fingers, he removes her still damp kimono and lets it fall to the floor. She is completely naked in front of him, her body covered in goose flesh and trembling with nervous expectancy. His eyes remain focused on her while he furiously struggles to undo his own undergarments. Ryoko is lying on the floor now, a flower in bloom ready to be picked, smelled, tasted. With a blinding fury, he finds himself slithering her soft, tender face with his tongue and lips, biting her neck and touching his trembling fingers to her open mouth. But she is different, no longer sweet, tender, or fragrant, and he is suddenly repulsed by her breath. He jerks his head away. A limp mouth filled with crooked yellow teeth is giggling at him gleefully. Oh God, not that filthy toad-like hag again. He leaps up from the floor and runs about as if his manhood had been stunned by a hornet hidden in a huge, sickly flower. Burning with rage, he runs into the next room where his Sadamitsu, or cousin's precious gift, is hanging on the wall next to his field binoculars. In a rage, he draws his sword and silver light flashes inside the room. He rushes back to confront the thing. But as he enters the bedroom, sword drawn, the dirty yellow-teethed hag is nowhere to be found. "Sir," asks a beautiful young girl in a frightened voice. She holds her chin in one hand. Her liquid eyes are fixed on the shining tip of his sword. He freezes. "You are my Mizura's patron, remember?" She tries to give him a coy look. "I am?" "Yes." "Be still." "Why do you want to kill me?" "Because you're not the same anymore." "What?" She is confused and terrified. "I've paid 200 for a pure, clean virgin that nobody has ever touched." "But I was," she stammers, trying in vain to search for the meaning in his words. "You are not anymore." But it was you. It was you." Her once geisha-like composure crumbles, and tears come streaming down her cheeks relentlessly. She coughs, gasping and choking on her sobs. "You have been soiled," he yells, standing over her, sword raised. She cannot look at him. She reaches for the shiromoko to cover her body. She buries her face in it, wiping away the tears, rouge and mucus in the soft fabric. "My shiromoko!" he shrieks furiously. She has soiled the shiromoko. She is just as hopeless and despicable as those Chinese huaguoniao. With one perfect swing, he lets the sword fall. Nakamoto came to half-dazed. He looked around. In front of him, the fire in the fireplace had grown dim, and only a few small embers crackled and spit bright orange, then faded. He heard the man upstairs talking animatedly. He found his gold-rimmed glasses, put them on, got up and walked upstairs to his bedroom. Zamba had prepared his bed, and it was clean and neatly made. The soldiers had just started a new song. "You and I are cherry blossoms of the same year, even if we're far apart." "Zamba," he called, "tell them to shut up." "Yes, sir." He heard the door being kicked open and Zamba yelling, "Quit howling, or have you skinned." Yawning now, Nakamoto went to the bathroom one more time. Suddenly he was aware of something cold and wet between his inner thighs. "Zamba," he yelled, "prepare my bath."